Thank you, Rob. In the absence of the chair and the vice chair, I'll call this meeting to order. I'm looking for a mover to appoint someone as chair until the vice chair is able to join us. Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd be happy to nominate Councillor Soever to chair the meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Keaveney. Any opposed to that? All in favor? I'll see all your hands so you can raise your hands. Okay. Councillor Soever, are you happy to chair the meeting until the vice chair joins us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'll pass it over to you then, sir.
Okay, very good. The meeting being called to order. The first item is, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, if any should arise, please let the clerk know. The next item is the Grey County Affordable Housing Statistical Package.
Thank you, Councillor Soever.
Randy, then.
And good afternoon, Task Force. As Kim noted, it's been a while since the last discussion we've had with respect. It's good to get back to looking at this key issue that we have throughout Grey County. As per our last discussion, I think part of the discussion was analyze some existing data sets to, again, try to get a better sense of the existing housing needs, existing housing market, and try to determine some of the core housing need as well throughout the county. So Brad Noble, our planning data analysis coordinator, has started to dig in some of the existing data sets, mostly from Stats Canada as well as CMHC at this stage. And we're just going through a kind of a first pass through that data. So we hope to dig into some of those data even further. But we wanted to present some preliminary results, I guess, of that data to date. And so maybe I'll just pull up. Well, everyone has it on the screen, but I'll share the screen here if I have the ability. Okay, there we go. Oh, that's not it. Try that again. If I can stop share, there we go. It's been a while since I shared my screen, apparently.
It did show up just a second ago.
Yeah.
There we go.
You can see it now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So just to dig into it, so slide 2 of that presentation that was attached to the agenda shows some average market rent. And based on the data that we've dug into based on Stats Canada, it shows from 2013 to 2017. And as you can see, the overall general trend is that the market rent has increased within that time frame. For comparison purposes, we also added Bruce County and the Ontario as well as the province, just to provide some context. And as you can see, the average market rate has gone up in both Bruce County as well as the province as a whole, which is similar to what we're seeing in Grey County. If we had data past 2017, based on what we've seen, heard, is that trend has continued and that the average market rent has continued to increase. Next slide is basically showing the average 2-bedroom rent for some municipalities in Grey County, as well as some nearby municipalities. And this is where we have data that's available through CMHC. And there's only certain municipalities where we have detailed data sets for through CMHC, and that's why you see Owen Sound, Meaford, and West Grey being shown on this slide with respect to Grey County. And for based on Owen Sound, Meaford, and West Grey, the average 2-bedroom rent is not as high as others like Saugeen Shores, Kincardine, and Collingwood, but it's still high based on the average income for these communities. Next slide shows the Grey County rental vacancy rates, as well as the Ontario vacancy rates for 1, 2, and 3 plus bedrooms. Again, from that 2013 to 2017. As you can see, in 2016, we were at a fairly low compared to the rest of the years. And then for whatever reason, there was an increase in 2017. We need to further dig into this data to see what's happening there. As to why there was an increase following 2016. But just to give you a sense of where we're at with respect to 1 bedroom, 3 plus bedroom, at least as of 2017, based on Stats Canada data, those are our current vacancy rates. Just go to the next slide. Slide 5 shows the average and median dwelling value from 2013 to 2017. For both Grey County and Bruce County. And again, the trend has been that the average and median dwelling values has continued to increase. And we, again, if we had data beyond 2017, it would point to this trend continuing to increase based on what we have seen and heard from local real estate associations. Next slide shows housing starts by dwelling type. And predominantly, historically, it's been singles, but we are seeing an increase in semi-attached dwellings and other multiple dwelling type units based on proposed developments or developments that have been draft approved within the last few years, and we're starting to see now being developed. And the next slide points to that in the fact that this slide shows dwellings under construction as of the first quarter of this year. And as you can see, in Owen Sound and Meaford, there are more multiple dwelling construction versus singles, which is a good stat to see. And I think this is based on some policy changes with respect to encouraging a mixed use or mixed housing types, as well as higher density in our key primary settlement areas as well. So that's a good trend to see, that we're seeing under construction more multiple dwellings than single dwellings, which again will hopefully help to support the overall housing need that we are seeing on the ground.
Mr. Chair, Warden McQueen here.
Yes, go ahead.
Am I able to ask a question to you, Randy, at this point?
Sure, yeah.
Just going back 2 screens, you showed the Grey County average and median dwelling value in Grey County, but are you able to break that down per municipality? Because I would think that there would be a difference between Owen Sound and Town of the Mountains, for example, right?
Yeah, some of the data we can break it down by local municipality, and that's something that we would, you know, if that's something that we would like to see, we would definitely explore that. So for Stats Canada, we should be able to break it down by local municipality. For this stage, we wanted to provide, you know, an overall context for Grey County, but definitely we can drill down into these data sets further. And that's probably part of the next steps that staff would be recommending, is that we look into not only these existing data sets and drill down into them further, but what other data sets that we could also explore to, again, get a better sense of where that overall housing need is. And it, based on the data that we're seeing, it can vary throughout the various communities throughout Grey County, which is good. That's what we want to see, so that we can, when we're doing our when we're encouraging affordable housing builds, or if we have property or land available, we can actually point to what is required or needed in those communities.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes. And Randy, I just like to follow up on Paul's question there. Certainly there's value in comparing us to Bruce County, but what happens here is more in tune with what's happening in Simcoe County. And I think that's becoming true for Grey Highlands as well, is that we are starting to behave in terms of housing market more like the urban fringe of the GTA. And I think it's going to be particularly relevant in the post-COVID world, where people are able to work more from home. We may see people spending 5 days here and 2 days in the city doing meetings and things, rather than the other way around. So I think it's also relevant to look at you know, what's happening in Simcoe County. In particular, I was struck by the rental rates that you showed on an earlier slide, where I know we don't have a lot of rental information in the town of Blue Mountains, but I would say we're somewhat higher than even Collingwood, but we're certainly more like Collingwood than West Grey, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's where the importance of drilling down on some of this data further. And I think both Council Swever and Ward McQueen hit some great points, and so that's where we want to dig into some of this further, and add to some comparisons, because as pointed out on this slide, in terms of the average 2-bedroom rents, as you can see, the highest in and around our area based on the data we have available through CMHC, Collingwood is the highest. And so on the fringes of Grey County to our east, like Blue Mountains and Grey Highlands, it's likely that we're going to see the average 2-bedroom rent higher in those municipalities as well. Just going back to slide, I think we're on slide 8. So yeah, just to follow that up. So again, the trend with respect to dwellings under construction based on the first quarter of this year, again, points to that there seems to be more multiple dwellings under construction, as noted, which is a good trend to see.
Randy?
Yes.
No, sorry to interrupt, but on that slide, town of the Blue Mountains, certainly we've traditionally been about 40% of dwelling starts in Grey County, and I think we're already at something like 150 million in building permits now. I can't remember what the number was. So, but we don't see our stats there. So I think we're going to look a lot like Wasaga Beach and Collingwood, maybe not in terms of the style of houses, but that's one of the issues with affordability, is that we are a large percentage of the county, and we're not really doing well on a mix of housing types.
Yeah, and that's again indicative of this current data set that's being displayed here is based on CMHC data, and we unfortunately only have that data available for 3 of our municipalities in Grey County. So we'll be looking at what other data sets that we have, including building permit information, financial information returns that municipalities report on, just to see if we can build in some further stats of what the building permits and the housing types that have been built over the last few years, to see what that trend is. So we'll be digging into some of those further data sets further for sure. In terms of core housing need, so CMHC defines core housing need is housing that falls below at least one of the adequacy, affordability, or suitability standards, and would have to spend 30% or more of its total before tax income to pay the median rent of alternative local housing that meets those 3 housing standards. And I'll get into a little bit later on in terms of those 3 housing standards. But just to give you a sense of core housing need, this slide shows core housing need with between renters versus ownership households. Grey County is showing here the majority of the core housing needs is with rentals, with some core housing need in the ownership category as well. So 1,100 renter households in terms of core housing need, and 1,500 households in ownership core housing need. Same stats with respect to looking at housing need by household type. The greatest need is with 1-person households versus households with 2 or more people. And again, we'll get into that a little bit later in terms of that. I think is reflective of the demographics of Grey County as well. And in terms of the core housing need by immigration status, it's showing the core housing need is greater with non-immigrants. What I can say though is that when talking to newcomers wanting to move to this area, they can't find housing. So I don't think that truly captures the core housing need with respect to immigrants. What I think this data represents is core housing need for those currently residing in Grey County. So therefore, if we're wanting to look at attracting newcomers or young families to our area, obviously those housing needs would be a lot different than basically what our core housing need is based on residents that are currently living and residing in Grey County. Slide 10 provides a bit more definition in terms of what CMHC means when it comes to affordable housing, adequate housing, and suitable housing. And essentially, affordable housing, as I mentioned, costs less than of before tax household income. And adequate housing does not require any major repairs according to residents. And suitable housing has enough bedrooms for the size and makeup of the resident households. And these are according to national occupancy standard requirements. So when we look at the core housing needs standards, both for renters versus owners, by household type, and by immigration status, as you can see across the board, affordability stands out to be the biggest core housing need based on those three standards. So when we're comparing adequacy of housing, affordability of housing, and suitability of housing, as I mentioned, affordability stands out both for the ownership, renters versus owners, for household type, as well as for immigration status. And that's consistent with what we're hearing on the ground, is that there's a lack of overall affordable housing. And so slide 12, again, digs into this a little bit further, drills down into those municipalities, again, where CMHC has data for. And as you can see on this slide, Owen Sound has, with respect to below affordability, is the highest in the area, and below adequacy repair is also the highest in the area. For Georgian Bluffs and West Grey and Meaford, affordability is still a concern or an issue, but less so compared to other municipalities, as you can see on this slide. So what we were able to do is, because we have data available through CMHC, again, for Owen Sound, for Meaford and West Grey, we took one of those municipalities. We picked Owen Sound just because, again, of the previous slide, looking at the overall affordability, it seems to be the highest in the area based on the data, again, that we have for municipalities. And so we wanted to drill down into that data a little bit further to see if there's key groups of interest that are identified in the data locally. So slide 14, it shows average income and average shelter costs for owning and renting in Owen Sound. And this goes back to 2016. So this is based on the most recent data that CMHC has available. But as you can see, that's showing the average income in the core housing need category in Owen Sound for owners and renters. And the average shelter cost is reflected on the table beside. The next slide shows core housing need by maintainer age and by immigration status. And as you can see, the highest core housing need is for rentals, and that increases by age. So the older the population, the higher the core housing need increases. This, I think, is also a reflection of our current demographics, in that a good portion of our population is over the age of 55, and majority are currently non-immigrants. And I think that's why we're seeing the data the way it's being shown here. Slide 16 shows the Owen Sound core housing need by household type. And as you can see, one-person households being the greatest housing need, and particularly single female one-person households over the age of 65 stands out as a fairly high need. And as you can see, there are other core housing needs and other household types. So it's important not to lose sight of this, and to make sure that any future builds provide a mix of housing types or are modular in design so that they can be easily converted to address core housing needs, not only now, but can be easily converted to meet core housing needs in the future as well. The next slide shows core housing need by Aboriginal status and by activity limitations. And although non-Aboriginal households represent the greatest core housing need, again, we can't lose sight of the fact that there are also core housing needs for Aboriginal households as well. In terms of activity limitations, as you can see with the graph on the right, the majority of the people in core housing need have at least one person with activity limitations, highlighting the importance of ensuring that any housing that's built meets accessibility standards. The next slide shows core housing need by seniors present and by minors present. Majority of the housing needs are for non-senior households. However, there is a definite need for seniors housing, with a third of the overall core housing need being 65 age or older. In terms of minors present, the majority of the core housing need do not have a child less than 18 years old. But again, not losing sight of the fact that there are approximately 300 households in core housing need that have a child that's less than 18 years of age. So some of the key takeaways based on drilling down further into just the Owen Sound example, it shows that the key group of interests in core housing need includes 600 female one-person households, half of which are senior 65 plus. That the Grey County housing construction has been historically dominated by single detached dwellings. However, the recent stats from CMHC, as well as just looking at the subdivisions and other things that have been built are being proposed now, it shows that there's a trend to having more a mixture of dwelling types and multiple dwelling types. And so we've seen a shift in the past few years based on these development proposals proposing a mix of housing types. And again, I think that's partly a result of policy changes both at provincial level, county level, and local level. We've also started to drill down further into some of the other data that we have access to for other municipalities that CMHC has available. So we've started to look at West Grey. Some of the early results for West Grey show similar results to Owen Sound in that a good portion of the core housing need is for one-person households. But unlike Owen Sound, it seems to be pointing so Owen Sound, as I mentioned, shows a greater need for female one-person households. In West Grey, it's more equal in the need for between males and females needing a single-person housing. There's also a more equal need for ownership and rental housing in West Grey compared to Owen Sound, where the majority of the need was pointing to rentals. So that's just something that we're just, again, exploring further, and we'll provide that information to the task force once it's finalized. And as I mentioned, this is just kind of a first pass at looking at some existing data sets to try to get a better sense of those housing needs within our communities. There are other data sets that we need to explore, as pointed out by both Warden McQueen and Councillor Swever. And so we'll look at exploring those data sets further with local municipal staff, just to get a better sense of what are the needs in each of our respective communities across Grey County. And this, again, as I mentioned, this data will help to build a business case for the type of housing that needs to be built in these various communities. And I think it points to the need that for a variety of housing types to ensure that whatever housing is built can be easily converted, so that as the needs in the community change, that our housing stock can change to meet those changing demands. The Durham build is a great example whereby a number of units were built to address the core housing need of affordable rental housing, while others were more at market rate rental housing to address the attainable housing need. So that's something that we just need to keep our sight on, is that although there may be key interest groups and core housing needs in certain communities that we need to focus on, not losing sight of the fact that there are other needs as well in our populations when it comes to core housing. So that's just a brief overview of that slide deck, and I'll be happy to take any further questions with respect to that.
Any questions? Hearing none. We'll ask again. Any questions? If not,
Mr. Chair,
yes, Warden McQueen.
great information, like, and just oodles and oodles of information there, and I'm sure you can break it down even further. And it just a good cross section of Grey County as a whole. And as you said, Randy, about zeroing in further on that would be really, really good. So this speaks to a lot of different aspects of housing. And I was going, just before we get further on our agenda, I went back to our minutes of our first meeting in March. I think it was March 3rd. And there was a lot of discussion, I think, that Randy brought, not Randy, Scott brought forward in a report there as well. And a lot of different aspects of affordable housing. And some of the takeaways that were mentioned at that meeting as well was also on the planning side of taking that type of housing and going into further aspects of how do we create that. And some of those summary points I gathered from those minutes were lot sizes, secondary units, incentive for young people to buy homes, surplus land, which we're going to be talking a little bit with regards to the municipal inventory as the next slide comes up. And again, municipal land availability. DCs and DCs on smaller or secondary units was another item that we had talked in there. And also a deferral on DC on rental units, right? That was something else. Inclusionary zoning was another topic. And, also certainly seeing that a great need is in the Owen Sound area for sure, and Owen Sound itself, but also other parts of Grey County in the sense of different makeups of demand. Certainly from, I see a great change happening just even in Southgate with regards to that development, and just that fringing part that's coming up from the GTA that's affecting that part of Grey County. We know of Blue Mountains, certainly Owen Sound, and then you mentioned about West Grey and how. So we certainly have because of the vastness of Grey County, we have certainly a lot of different pockets. And certainly I would say probably with Blue Mountains and the fringes of Blue Mountains with Meaford and Grey Highlands is that affordability in the sense of young people to be able to live there and work. And I know, the affordability is probably less or more. I guess it depends where you work, where you live, and where you're doing your business as well. And as we know on the hospitality side, it's a lower paying occupation, but in high demand. And we know with COVID-19 how that's being affected as of today, and it must be pretty tough on those individuals that were working in the tourism industry right now and trying to find a place to live. And I know Blue Mountains are working on a plan there as well. So there's a great chunk of mix of different cohorts. And the other last question I want to throw out there, and these are just for thought-provoking points from our meeting in March, is that cohort of the baby boomers that are just that new upcoming, not baby boomers, millennials that are in that next stage of in the workforce and moving forward in that whole new generational change that we're probably going to see, and looking at raising families and that sort of thing. Personally, I feel that there is going to be a change, and I've been saying this a little bit about Central Ontario, and more so with broadband and the ability to, work where you choose versus having to, choose where you work, so to speak. You know what I mean? In the sense of don't have that option is, you got to work where you got to go to the office and that type of thing. So there's a lot of, even just out of COVID-19 from our March meeting, there's been a lot of shifts that we're going to maybe see that we maybe don't know exactly what that looks like. And again, the other part is we're working on, and then when COVID-19 hit, is transportation and the ability to move around. Not everybody has a car, and the cost of a car, and I know we looked at that part of transit, and then so many things have sort of got, And I'm so glad we've got this meeting going today to get back on that, that swing of things of, and I think as Councillor O'Leary said at our last meeting, we've talked about it, let's get something done. And I remember those words that Brian said, and they sort of, and that's where, I'm so excited that we are, moving forward with, we've got to get the information, we got to understand, and certainly looking at moving forward. So there's just some thought-provoking comments and some things that came from our March meeting, and certainly looking, and I'm sorry to interject partway through the agenda, but it just when you're talking about affordable housing and your takeaway, there's so many facets of this whole sector that we have to get our head sort of around, but it's not going to be one size fits all. There's going to be so many different facets that we're going to have to look at, and how that fits into our county, and part of that will be is continuing to get the right data and understanding and all that stuff. And even from a real estate point, Mitch Toulon, who was the warden of Bruce County, just said that a few weeks back at a meeting we had, that I think Grey Bruce real estate sales are up 35% over last year. Like, it's just, there's so many dynamics happening, and it's just so there's so many things that are out there, and we're trying to sort of catch that train that's running down the track and get on it and then try to understand what we have to do, and look forward to other people's comments. But
Okay.
So glad that we're getting on with this.
Let's stay on the topic of statistics though right now before we get too wrapped up on other things. You had your hand up.
I did, Councillor Seweber, although you may tell me I'm off topic as well. I was just going to follow up on Warden McQueen's comments and just suggest what a difference there is between now and March, as we've stated. And in Meaford, we're already seeing young families and young people choosing our area, getting out of the city. The urban flight, as they call it, is happening. And I just think it's so interesting how that's going to impact the unemployment issues that we've been facing for years now. And we've got to get ready for these folks with this housing. So I'll leave it there and come back to it, because I know you want to get on with the agenda, but we're already seeing things happening in Meaford.
Yeah, we're seeing that as well, and get that school finished, because we'll need the old school for the overflow.
We're on it.
Okay, next.
Okay, if I may, moving on from there, then did we want to talk about the land mapping piece, Randy?
Yeah, I'll just talk about that briefly. And again, this is following our previous discussions. The task force asked, we started talking about, we're going to be offering up land as a potential incentive. And this gets into the buildup, I guess, of the affordable housing strategies and some of the action items that Anne-Marie is going to talk about. So we started talking about, if we're going to be offering up land as incentives for future affordable housing builds through land programs and other things like that, what do we have available? So we've had Carolyn, our planning technician, she's prepared some mapping based on ownership data that shows what lands are owned by the province, what lands are owned by Grey County, as well as our local municipalities. And these are within the various settlement areas throughout Grey County. And so that's the package, and I'll try and share my screen again with respect to that. Did have it open. Let's see. Try again. Here it is. So this is just to give you a sense of the mapping that was attached as a link to the agenda. So this basically shows, as I mentioned, what lands are publicly owned within our various settlement areas. And although we mapped all the settlement areas, the highest potential will be for our fully serviced settlement areas, as these areas, contain the facilities and resources that are required to serve folks that would be residing in these future housing units that we are talking about working with developers to potentially build. We still need to review the mapping in further detail. As you can see, there's a lot of mapping here, and some properties are just won't work. Some of them are just lands that we have a cemetery on, or some are nature reserves that are owned by the province that, of course, would not be suitable for certain types of developments. But there are pockets that may be suitable. And I think the next steps would be to have some further discussions with local municipalities and local municipal staff to see if there are any pockets that are mapped in these on these maps that could be potentially utilized as for future affordable housing builds, and to be part of this establishing that land bank, which we'll get into in a little bit as part of the recommended action items. No doubt, once the county fully acquires the Durham property, when we build the new existing Rockwood Terrace, we will have also a surplus building in Durham. And there are definitely others, like I said, other pockets throughout various communities that I think we can explore further to see if there are options or opportunities there. So, but what it does point to, I think, is there's still for sure going to be a need to potentially acquire land. And again, this will get into the next steps of the affordable housing strategies that Anne-Marie will speak to. Yeah, I think there's still going to be a need to potentially set aside some funds to acquire properties as they become available so that we can move forward with supporting affordable housing builds. But at least this points to some mapping that, yeah, some properties could work. We need to explore those further with local municipal staff. And again, I'm happy to take any questions with respect to this.
Any questions?
So, Mr. Chair, certainly through you, Mr. Chair, to Randy, certainly a big chunk of land is the lands that we're acquiring in West Grey, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know,
And we've I can't remember what map number it is. Oh yeah, here it is. So you know, so that's the lands to be acquired by Grey County. So we haven't fully acquired those yet, but we identified those as lands that will be owned by Grey County. No doubt there's we think there's going to be lots of potential there to look at housing builds, affordable housing builds. And as mentioned, once we build the new Rockwood Terrace, is there the possibility to take the existing Rockwood Terrace and look at a conversion for affordable housing as well? So I think West Grey is poised. There's lots of potential there. We need to look at some of our other communities as well, because as noted, the housing need is across the county. You need to explore some of those pockets that maybe we already own publicly that could be utilized. And if there isn't, then again, do we need to set aside some funds to start acquiring some land, similar to what Town of Blue Mountains has done is by acquiring the Foodland property, for example, to look at a housing build. So, so that's something that we may have to explore further, and which leads into, I think, the affordable housing strategy and the action plan that Anne-Marie will speak to later on.
Yes, and thank you, Randy, for that. I've looked through the Blue Mountain maps, and certainly that's a lot of great work done there. We need to look at some of the other ones. Some of the other issues surrounding some of those lands, I think one of them is an ANSI, so I don't think we're going to build there. But you know, I think there is a lot of provincially owned land, and I think, you know, the province talks a lot about attainable housing. So unfortunately, a lot of that is also governed by the Niagara Escarpment Commission. So that brings its own problems.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. Any other questions for Randy? Not, we'll move on to the next item, which is the analysis of the current wait list for rent geared to income housing. That's a verbal update.
That would be mine, thank you. Heather, I believe, does have a spreadsheet that she was going to pull up for me. So I did have a look at our wait list, and the wait list itself just gives us an idea of people looking for housing in the area that are in a very high core need. We talked about core need, and core need being about 30% of your income. Most of the people on our wait list make way below that. For instance, when I did an analysis of our wait list, we actually have about 1,440 people on our wait list. Of those, only 507 have an address in Grey County. A lot of other, again, that it's sort of out there that the social housing wait lists are lower in rural areas. So we are seeing a big increase in people that are applying elsewhere or from elsewhere. The other thing is we had 156 applicants with no address on the list. And of those, we were able to identify 40 as local. So when we look at something like this, it does tell us about a bit of a picture. We know that there is demand for social housing everywhere in Ontario, so people are putting themselves on multiple lists. We know that for people that require housing that is less than $500 a month, that would pretty much be everybody that we're talking about on the list, and even a little bit lower than that. Here's what we found. Obviously, Chatsworth, we had 6 people on our wait list. I believe there were actually 48 people on the wait list, but only 6 of them actually had a Chatsworth address. There were a lot on there from Owen Sound, which is to be expected, but we made the assumption that if they're from Owen Sound, that they probably do want to stay in Owen Sound. And so that's how we looked at the list. If you'll note, our largest area that needs housing, especially for social housing, is Owen Sound at 369 people with an Owen Sound address looking for housing. Durham, Hanover, and Meaford were our larger areas. There were some in other areas. I mean, Thornbury had 4 seniors and 4 non-seniors. Again, these are people with we're looking at that high core income. If you look at the bottom graph, it does say the average income of people that are living in our housing is for a single person $13,794. So that person is looking for rent that cannot be other than social housing. It would have to be subsidized housing. Our seniors, we have 490 seniors that live with us, and that is 65 and above. And of those singles, the 272, there were a very large percentage that were 55 and above. There's probably about another 70. So we do know for a fact that seniors housing is something that is quite prevalent. I didn't go in to look at female and male, but just knowing the people that live in our buildings, we do have a disproportionate number of females, seniors that live with us versus males too. So that certainly does bode well with what Randy's information was, that in Grey County, we do need seniors housing and single female housing. So just also having a look, we also have 231 families that live with us, and they have an average income of $21,794. So if we looked at a senior making $20,000, 30% of their income, which would be considered affordable, is $500. So they will never find a market rent unit. So we do know that we do need to have some very affordable housing. So that's social housing. So this obviously is just looking at one population, one segment of our population, but it does speak to the need of affordable housing. I recognize that there's other people that need housing that make above that $20,000, so in that $20,000 to $50,000 income limit too. But as Randy said, when we're looking at building housing, and I think in my next presentation, it'll talk a little bit more to that we need to look at housing that is market affordable and probably that lower end affordable also, so that we're meeting everyone's needs. Also looking to the fact too that when Randy's group looked at the statistics, they were looking strictly to determine core need. They're looking at a person's income. So that's how they're determining that core need. Probably the 993 people that we are housing already will be included in those numbers. So those are things that we need to dig a little bit deeper in order to figure out actual amounts and numbers in specific areas. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Any questions? So, Anne Marie, it looks to me like these income levels are quite low, and when we discuss our attainable housing corporation, we're looking at the missing middle.
That's right.
those would be people with a family income of between 40 and 100,000, and they still would fall in that they can't spend more than 30% of their pre-tax income on housing, because we're looking at rents here in excess of $1,500 if you can find a place.
Mhm.
So when we're looking at need here, this is looking at the people that are in our current housing, but in a wait list that covers all of Ontario. Now, there's a limit to how many people we can service as a county. So is there any way of restricting it to people who are residents and are already working in Grey County?
There isn't for the wait list part of it, but I can tell you that for the people that live in Toronto and Hamilton, when they do get to the top of the list and we offer them housing, majority of the time they turn us down. So at some time three years ago, when they were desperate for housing, somebody put them on a list, right? And there are some that want to return to the area because maybe they do have family and whatnot, but the majority of people don't end up living with us up here. We can't. Social housing is open to anyone to apply for as long as they meet the requirements. So we can't filter through. But I think realistically, as to who is going to actually take an offer of housing, we're probably looking at the majority of being Grey County, and maybe some of the fringe Bruce County and Simcoe County residents that might be on our list too. Although I was very surprised that we only had 27 Bruce County applicants on our list. I thought it might be more than that. But yes, so that is, but I think if we're looking at a realistic picture of where and how many, this gives us a little bit better than that 1,040, which if we were to build 1,040 units with an income limit of, $20,000, then that maybe not as realistic. The other thing I wanted to touch on is the Durham build, as Randy mentioned. This is the opportunity that we can mix those units. So we can we could build, 30 units, and maybe 10 of them go towards people that are on the wait list, 10 of them go towards that missing middle, and then 10 of them go towards market. So there's that opportunity, and I think that's the right way to go. It makes the building sustainable so that, the county could break even or even, make some money on it to put into a capital reserve in order to make it work. So I think those are the types of projects that I would be looking for moving forward that sort of meet the needs of all.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
just I think you touched on a little bit. It's just not necessarily affordable, but attainable, and it depends, like you said, what income range that you could be in compared to the area that you're in, and where do you work versus not work, and travel, and a lot of different things. Just going back to my part about the millennials, or you call it the missing middle. I'm not sure what that exactly means, but I mean, one of the things that we seem to be low on is in Grey County, more so maybe in others, is families, and families, young families or where we have also community centers and arenas and facilities that are underutilized. From the simple fact is we don't have that family units are available for to raise a family. And that's something else that I think it's one of our mix here is how do we look at creating that first starter home, or that attainable home, or that first opportunity. And it goes back to that possibly is a rental home that moves into a small home. And that's where we've talked a little bit about tiny homes, or the opportunity for tiny homes for first, for young people or for seniors as well. And a lot of different mixes in the sense of opportunities outside. I know in Grey Highlands, we reduced our square footage requirement. We don't have a minimum size now. So through the building code, you can look at creating a smaller home other than 1,000 square foot was sort of the standard for a lot of people. And then there's also the climate change and the green build and less footprint. And there is that also that newer generation that are looking at smaller is better, only from that in the sense of the footprint. So there's so many variables that we can look at, and market mixes that we can sort of create or look at in the sense of what sort of has that appealing effect. And again, it probably depends on certain areas and certain income levels as well. But you know, it just, there's so many variables that we can talk about here. I like what Anne-Marie does say though, with regards to your waiting list, your missing metal, and then your marketplace, to make it, you're looking at a mix that sort of breaks even, but your market, obviously, Anne-Marie, the market units are what sort of carries the freight, I presume. Is that correct, Anne-Marie?
That is correct. And the rest of it would be subsidized through build, through, you know, saving money with either land or contribution from the province, contribution from Grey County. There's different ways, waiving of development charges. There's a number of ways to make the build cheap, to make the build affordable, so that you can afford the mortgage with a mix.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think right now it's interesting that the mortgage rates are really, really attractive. You know, like it's just, you know, it's just an interesting time. I'm gonna go mute. My clock's going off.
Okay, very good. Okay, any other questions for Anne-Marie? Shirley?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to suggest, I think we have such a great opportunity now, because I think it won't be long until we're back into the same kind of workforce challenge that we were facing prior to COVID, where we had the lowest unemployment rate in Ontario. And how do we use the time and the planning and the opportunity that we have now to create the kind of housing that will attract the people to take those hospitality jobs that we know that we need? If we can do that, something that's unique, as Warden McQueen suggested, the tiny home community, something of that nature that will really be appealing to the folks in the age group that we need up here. I just think that this is a time to really consider what our options are, and to take a little time and explore just exactly what kind of housing those people are looking for. And you know, as we go through this process of determining what we're going to do next.
Okay, anyone else?
Mr. Chair, it's Brian.
Go ahead, Brian.
About the tiny homes. Do we have any information on these tiny homes? Like, I just like to know if they're, like, if you had a tiny home that was 650 or 700 square feet, my first thought is 3 of those units together you could have 1 furnace. And so if you had, you know, many tiny homes, they would each have a furnace, and I just don't know if it works. Do we have information on that?
We do have some information. There have been, in some areas they work well. Down in the United States, in areas where there's no winter, where there's the opportunity for people to live together, in maybe areas. For up here, it's more difficult. Winter makes it difficult to build a tiny home. Building code right now makes it a little bit difficult to do that. Also, amenities. Most people that need a house that is affordable probably maybe don't have a car, maybe want to be able to walk to work, and finding something that is in town, a place to do that, is a little bit more difficult. Also, to me, you know, a tiny home is an apartment. If I'm looking at what's affordable and what is easier to build to cater to most people's needs, the majority of people's needs, it would be an apartment building. I'm not saying that there isn't a time and a place for tiny homes, but I really kind of think that that's more a group or an organization or a co-op to get involved with. There's lots of issues with land ownership if you're doing an ownership one that we would have to work out. It's not to say that there aren't successful tiny home areas around that we can actually, you know, maybe do some contacting and get a little bit more information. But for larger scale, to me, it makes more sense to do townhomes, row homes, and apartment buildings, because we know there's such a large need.
Yes. Brian, did you have a follow-up?
No, that's all. Thanks. I just, well, I'm glad that Warden McQueen brought it up. I mean, we have to consider everything, but I just wondering if we have that background. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, and I think Anne Marie's right. The tiny home is really an apartment building. Certainly, that's not going to be popular in most communities. We're having that discussion right now with our attainable housing. We floated a zoning bylaw amendment to go up to 5 stories, just so that we could get through that process, and it wasn't very well received. That being said, the biggest impediment to attainable housing is land value. And that's what we're finding here. I mean, when you look at the price we paid for the Foodland site or any other site, we bought another lot as well. And you look at, you've got to put a lot of units on that piece of land. You got to have density. Otherwise, you're not going to break even on the attainable housing. It's just, if you have tiny homes, even if each one was on their own tiny lot, I mean, property is very expensive here, and it just doesn't work. Okay, we're a little bit off topic, so I guess it's my fault on the chair. So let's to the next agenda item, which is the draft action plan for developing affordable housing.
Mr. Chair, did we ever find Mr. Burley? Did they ever surface anywhere?
Am I doing that bad of a job?
No,
No.
I'm sorry, Councilor Burley is unable to join us for the meeting. So Councilor Sweber, you'll just continue as the chair until the end of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
There was no intent.
So we're on to item 6.
There was no intent on the chair,
Action plan
Mr.
for
Chair.
developing affordable housing.
Thank you. So as part of our housing and homelessness plan, we put together a strategy looking at creating affordable housing. And again, when we say affordable, we're looking at focusing on the people that are on our wait list, along with some of that missing middle. As the county and Grey County Housing Director, my responsibility is looking at that social housing aspect of it, but also recognizing that the importance of affordable housing and that projects that we do build should be mixed. So when we looked at when we did our 2019 update, we looked at the first couple of years, knowing that in 2019 and 20, that there were funds coming from the province. So we were able to lobby the province for more funding, and we do have an affordable housing build of 59 units that's starting in Owen Sound. They should be receiving their build permit actually this week or next week. So things are moving forward with that apartment building. And that would be looking at 27 affordable units. So that would be people that could afford around that $600 market rent or $600 rent, and then right up to $900 in rent. So it's also a sum for that market or that missing middle, as Councilor Sweber refers to it. So that is what we have done so far. We also have received money for a housing benefit for up to 30 people from the province, and that is starting as of July 1st. So there are 30 people that will be moving off of our wait list, and hopefully 30 more with the build of this building. So that's sort of our moving forward, keeping things going. But what we do recognize now, funding from the province is going to be in smaller amounts, that it's going to be coming in smaller amounts to build. So we wanted to put together our own strategy of what we could do as a county in order to move forward with developing affordable housing. So I put together a strategy looking at getting ourselves poised so that we are shovel ready if funds do come from the province, but also recognizing that if we had our own funds, then we could look at moving forward with some of the developments that either our nonprofits, ourselves, or private developers might be interested in. So the first one is, of course, a housing task force, which we've already started. Secondly is looking at and doing an analysis of our wait list, talking with our municipalities, and really trying to get a good idea of what that local need is. And that needs to continue. We need to do more work on this, but this is our start. Establishing an affordable fund. We really can't do anything unless we have funding. So we do need to figure out what would be an appropriate amount for us to ask council for either an initial one-time funding commitment and ongoing funding would be my preference. So looking at both, so looking at a pot of money and then also looking at what could we put into that pot on an annual basis in order to keep momentum moving with developing affordable housing. And of course, always keeping in looking for any funds that we could access through the province and through the federal. Looking at establishing a land bank, and we've already started that process. Are there county properties for housing development, municipal? Are there private properties? There was a private property that went up for sale beside one of our social housing developments that easily we could have bought and made that larger. But we don't have that existing pot of money to do that. So, you know, that would have been an opportunity that possibly would have worked out for us. We need to look at developing that incentive package for rental housing development. So again, working with planning, looking for some ways in economic development. Are there ways in which we can incentivize to build? Access current community housing for redevelopment. We have a number of housing portfolios that exist that we could develop, divest. We could leverage the land. We could look for new opportunities and potential within. So if I have, let me use Dundalk, for example, I have a small apartment building there, but some land attached to it. There's certainly opportunity for that. And it would not just be social housing, it would be market, you know, missing middle housing and obviously social housing combined. We do have our building condition assessments with a facility condition index, which will be happening this year. So that's going to give us some good information on the longevity of some of the apartment buildings that we have. And we are required to have the number of affordable housing units that we do have or social housing units that we do have. So there might be, you know, looking at that plan, how do we sustain it? And is there the ability to add additional units? We are working with our nonprofits. We do have 2 nonprofits that are interested and do have land and would like to do some builds, but are just requiring some funding in order to do that. So there's certainly opportunity. Private public partnerships like we had with the Trembles with our Durham build, certainly looking at more opportunities for theirs, along with the commitment from the developer of 20 years or more of affordable housing rents or affordable rents. And the way to do that certainly is once we figure out what we need and where and what opportunities we have with land and funding, then looking at developing an RFP and getting it out there. But there has to be some incentives for developing that affordable housing. And we need to have all that in line before we do look at the RFP. That is the way we did come up with the Tremble build, and it was very successful. There's also other things we can look at is a secondary suite program and a county-wide or county portable rent supplement. For $90,000 at $300 a month, we would be able to provide stable housing for 25 people on our wait list. Of course, that would be ongoing, so it's $90,000 each year. But sometimes people on our wait list, all they need, and especially our seniors, they might be very stable where they are. Their supports are there. It's just that their rent and their hydro is becoming unaffordable. And this would be a great way of providing stability to people. So those are just some of the ideas and strategies that housing's looking at along with planning and economic development and just putting it out there for comment.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Any questions, comments?
Brian, I just have a comment. I want to thank Anne-Marie for this. I know you call it a strategy. I think it's an action plan myself. You've given us I think it puts the pressure on council to step up now and make some decisions in terms of funding. And I think it's easy to read, it's easy to follow, and really well done. So thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Something that we talked about again back in March was our development charge bylaw study coming up. And whether it's an apartment unit or a tiny home or whatever, if it's a small unit, can we look at the opportunity of just having a development charge exemption under a certain size? So what you're trying to do is you create that, you're incentivizing just in the sense of there's one sector of a certain size. Similar that we want to talk about on the secondary units that we want to review. Like if somebody builds a secondary unit, I know in Grey Highlands, we don't have a development charge on the secondary unit. I know we're working on that at the county. But if your tiny home is an apartment or it's a tiny home, doesn't matter. It's based on square footage. Could we have it through our development charge? So there's an incentive, and I guess it would be, so there is a development charge if you're building an apartment unit, number of units too, right? But if you're making that certain size, or there's I don't know, maybe it's a one-time thing for a unit versus, I don't know. Is there some way that instead of having necessarily funding it from one pot, but it's sort of that incentive, it sort of incentivizes that on the other side that, look, we don't charge development charges on this unit. I know development charges is based on the infrastructure of the system itself, but I don't know. Any thoughts there, anybody?
I would actually defer that to Randy.
Okay.
Yeah, so based on discussion with council on this matter previously, we've been working away at a development charge bylaw update. However, there were some regulations and some other things that were still changing through the Bill 197 that just got introduced. I think that was 2 weeks ago now. Again, I'm losing track of time. And what we're hearing is that could be passed actually very soon. That provides some further insight that we were looking for in terms of what changes are going to be actually made to the Development Charges Act, so that we can align with any development charge bylaw changes with where the Development Charges Act is going. So I think that Bill 197 provides that insight, like I said, that we were looking for. We are bringing forward a kind of the first step to that actually on Thursday with respect to the development charge interest rate policy. So we'll be starting that discussion. And then shortly thereafter, we're hoping to bring forward those development charge bylaw updates, which would look at, based on previous discussions from council, we'll be looking at providing those exemptions for rental housing builds, for nonprofit builds, for secondary dwelling units, et cetera. So these are exactly the types of incentives that Emery discussed in the action plan that we've identified, and what other previous studies have noted and identified. If we're really going to try and encourage this type of development in our area, incentives are key, and that's where it's important to have things like their community improvement plan program in place, so that we can offer up land as well as other maybe application fee reductions. And that's another thing, I guess, that's coming forward on Committee of the Whole on Thursday, is an update to our fees and services bylaw. And you'll see one proposed change in as part of that is that if there's any community improvement plan developments that are receive incentives under the CIP program, that fees and services could also be reduced or waived in accordance with that CIP. So it's starting to all somewhat come together and from an incentive package perspective, but again, we can look at further incentives as well in order to try and encourage this development that we desperately need in our area. So yeah, so there'll be further information on that coming forward, not only this Thursday Committee of the Whole meeting, but shortly thereafter, we'll also be bringing forward the actual DC bylaw proposed changes, which requires a public meeting in order for a council to fully pass those. But that'll be coming forward very soon.
Okay,
Thank
so
you,
it's good to
Randy. Go ahead, Paul.
No, that's all. Just thank you for that. We just have to look at a menu of all different opportunities to make things happen, and I just wanted to have that conversation as well, because you just it's not one thing. It's going to maybe take a lot of different things to make some great things happen, and that's fantastic to hear. We'll have further conversation about that. I'll try to bring a little bit more information about tiny homes. I'll try to dig into that a little bit, some possibilities. I think Councillor Leary makes a good point. I think one part of necessarily a tiny home, but it's maybe a smaller home, it's less impact, and there seems to be interest in that. And I was sort of looking at some ideas of like a four unit tiny home type of thing where you share some walls and you share a driveway and you share a well, and you almost like a condominium type idea, that it's sort of a unit. It's 4 units. It's sort of like an apartment size, like Anne Marie sort of saying, but it's sort of out in the country a little bit too, or it's out, has space, so you still have the ability, because some of the younger generations like to have gardens and they like to have, you know, there's a lot of different ideas that could maybe make it work, and I'll have to do some more research on that too. And I understand that it's something new, and you know, it's something that we have to look somewhere else to see how it's being developed, and I'll maybe look into it a little bit.
Okay, thank you. So Randy, on the DC exemptions, yeah, we've just come up against that here. The person bought the funeral home here in Thornbury and wants to put 10 small residential units in there. The development charges are per unit, unfortunately, and so we're gonna deal with that. It'll be interesting to see what solution we come up with, because it's on its intensification. We're not actually adding to our water and sewer system. We're not adding to the road system. Certainly there'll be some more use, but it's like, logically, it doesn't make sense that we would charge the full development charges on something that isn't going to require, because the servicing is already there and it's not adding to the network. It's not an extension, it's internal. So it's an interesting concept there. Okay, so now we get to the review the task force mandate part, carried forward from the previous meeting in March, which I missed. Unfortunately, I was relaxing in a medical facility at the time. Who's gonna lead this one?
I guess between Heather and I, we can pick up this thread a little bit. So really following on the information that you've heard today, we didn't, just to be clear, we did not discuss the terms of reference at the March meeting. We talked at that time, as was noted earlier in the meeting, about kind of some more of the breadth of the work that's been undertaken in the past. Anne Marie's provided a strategy or an action plan as a suggestion for this group moving forward. Is there support for the strategic initiatives that are listed in that? And if so, we can work to build a mandate and a terms of reference for the committee around this kind of work. Does anybody feel that there's gaps in those strategic initiatives, things that you'd like to see added, or do you have any concerns about the strategic initiatives as they're noted there?
Mr. Chair, this is relatively a new committee, so I look at it as a living document. So why not bring it forward for comments and get some feedback from like, will we bringing this back to County Council, Madam CEO, to get some feedback? Or how do you, like, I know right now we're missing Selwyn, and I know Selwyn's very passionate about social housing, and a big part of I know that's a big important part of what he likes to be part of. And but what's your thoughts? And like it's a living document in the sense that we get some feedback from County Council on that, or what's your thought? Like, move it forward to that and get some feedback, or what's your thought?
I think certainly the minutes of this meeting would go forward to County Council. If there was a resolution passed by this task force, then that would go to County Council to either be adopted or sent back for further discussion. I don't know, Heather.
That's correct. So the minutes of today's meeting will go forward, and Council, of course, has the opportunity to review all of the documents that were included in today's agenda. And with the consent of this task force today, staff will then develop some terms of reference and bring those forward to our next meeting, and those will subsequently be provided to Council as part of a committee package for their approval. So they will be seeing everything that's presented to this task force as well as all of the other ones.
Okay. I guess just to follow up with that, Mr. Chair, is there's only 4 of us out of 18 that's here. So I'll certainly support it moving forward. So.
Yes. Anyone else before I speak, or?
I can speak, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, like, if we were looking for a motion, Kim, I'd be happy to move acceptance of the strategy. Like, I think it's so wide open. Certainly, it needs to be fine tuned when we get to a certain point, but I don't think we should shy away from making any decisions here. I think this is great. I think we should lock it up and take it to council.
That's great. If you're moving that, this housing strategy as drafted be, that the committee supports this as the direction that the committee's work can take, at least, as we move forward now, that's useful. And if
So moved.
seconder for that, then
Do we have a seconder for that? Seconded by Shirley. I would say that as part of the mandate, we need to kind of clarify. I like the strategy, but we need to look at our target audience. Is it going to be restricted to social housing strictly, or is it going to be addressing a broader spectrum of people that are working and have a very modest income and are looking for, accommodation, as long as they fit within the 30%? Because, and then how do we define, like, if you look at Grey Bruce, that means a lot of people that work in the hospitality industry can live in West Grey and Owen Sound, but their hospitality jobs might be in Blue Mountain, which is 60 to 70 kilometers away if they drive in a straight line, and further if you go along the road. So the issue would then be, what is our mandate in terms of the overall breadth of the target audience? Are we going to restrict it to the very low end, or are we going to go for a blended thing? And the other thing I think we need to wrap our heads around before we go too far down this road is, what is affordable for the county? Are we aiming to create something that's sustainable, in that it's a housing authority that has income, has assets and capital within it, and can then eventually, like has happened in Whistler, finance itself and finance new projects by, especially in this day and age, if you have assets that you can put up as collateral, you can borrow money at a very cheap rate. And of course, we can use the county's borrowing if they co-sign a loan, as we did for Swift. Money is fairly cheap. So if you get the land for free and you defer the development charges, you should be able to build something that, if you have a blended building, is sustainable because it's actually generating as much money as it needs to maintain itself. So I think important in our mandate is, are we going to create something that needs $1 million of funding a year from the county, or 10? What is the appetite? Because if we create something and there's no appetite to fund it at the county level every year at budget meeting, then we're not going to get very far. So I think those are my 2 fundamental questions, which I think should be reflected in the mandate is, what is the target audience? What needs are we trying to fill? And how much funding and what kind of a funding mechanism are we going to set up? Does it have to be entirely self-funding or partially self-funding, or can we look to the county for 10 million a year? And that is fundamental in what we're doing.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, just to Anne Marie indicated that it's her experience that the most successful developments are ones that have a mix.
Yes.
And And so with the support of this committee, I think that's the direction that as staff, if we're working up things to bring back to you, that principle of having a mix and having some sort of a stream of market income is what we'd want to, you know, err on the side of. Is that right, Anne Marie?
That's correct. And also too, looking at different opportunities, like it may not be the county that actually is managing, it could be a nonprofit, it could be another private developer. So I think there's still lots of work to do in this action plan moving forward before we're going to be in front of council saying, here's the project that we have. But certainly I think if we're open to all those opportunities, whether it's county, again, and there might be, from my experience and even with Trumbull's and dealing with nonprofits, is there needs to be some funding upfront, even with free land, in order to make it sustainable, so that you can have market, middle and affordable. So there really does have to be a mix of everything. The Trumbull's, I mean, it worked out perfect for them. Our nonprofits with Owen Sound Municipal, a little bit different because they're going on such a large build and they're also looking at a very large number of affordable. And also my mandate and our mandate as a service manager, so Grey County's mandate and Grey County Council's mandate as service manager is community housing, but at the same time, it's also taking into, making sure that there is affordable housing out there for everybody. So certainly it would have to be a mix in my mind.
So, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So I brought forward a notice of motion back at last September. Oh, there's my clock again. Must be 3 o'clock. That looked at tiny homes and smaller lot requirements, and it was supported, and it hasn't came forward, and I figured it would be coming forward. And some of the points that Anne Marie has pointed out in her document does touch base on some of it. But the last point it does add in that notice of motion I brought forward, that planning policies and other initiatives in order, therefore be it resolved that staff bring back a report to committee of the whole on options for municipalities to consider when developing planning policies and other initiatives in order to improve affordable and attainable housing options in Grey County. And I understand that apartment units and that kind of thing is, but for Grey Highlands, for example, we have very little rentals, like we've talked about having, like even Chapman's creating some rental units, which would help out Chapman's employment base, because they have the old lands for where the building used to be, the old Chapman's factory used to be, and they were looking, but then I don't know if they realized that they're in the ice cream business or not in the rental business, and it sort of fell to the side, I guess, for now.
We are talking about the mandate right now.
Yeah, well, so my part is that mandate is where I'm coming from is there's a huge mix within Grey County. And I better plug my iPad in because I only got 5% here. Or you're going to lose me. Maybe that's a good thing. But there's a huge mix of what is a possibility. So for Markdale, it's different than maybe Owen Sound and elsewhere because there's a huge employer that has a hard time getting employees, but they need attainable homes to live there, to work there, right? And that type of thing. So that's why I said this is a living document. There's a lot of different points of creating a lot of different incentives, whether it's planning policies, whether it's DC charges, whether it's incentive or there's so many things that we can do and to sort of fulfill that need of the county of Grey as a whole. And I guess that's where Mr. Chair is there could be, we talked about this today. This is a really good start, and this is on the agenda. I just think there's some other things that could be included as well. And I know that a lot of lower tiers are doing their official plans, or to continue you do that official plans, and there's incentives that you can create. Simple things that just make a big difference. And we just got to think outside that box. That's all I would say, that we got to keep a very open mind of moving forward. And
yes.
You know what? Grey County are leaders to do a lot of things, and we're great leaders and creating those new incentives and creating new opportunities for those people. So I'll leave it at that. I gotta go plug my iPad.
You are the warden. And Heather, we have a motion. Oh, you're muted. Okay.
Mr. Warden, you can't leave because if you do leave, we don't have quorum.
No, I'm just going to plug it in. My cord's like
Okay.
store here. Are you going
There
to lose me?
is-
'Cause I think
So there is a motion on the floor, moved by Councillor O'Leary and seconded by Councillor Keaveney. Use the draft action plan as a strategic document. And I think with the discussion that's happened today, we can take some of those other points that people have brought up to pull in both the action items and those into a terms of reference and bring that back for the committee's consideration at the next meeting.
very good.
Good. So with that, if there's no further discussion, we'll call the question on that motion. All in favor? Okay, so it's carried.
Thank you.
I'm just going to slip and get a cord.
Okay, so the other business is Warden McQueen is taking a cord. Anybody else have any other business? No. Next, we have an item called reference items.
There were no reference items on the agenda. They were included as part of the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Next meeting date?
If you can leave that with the clerk's department, we will get a new date for people. It seems that what is it, it's the third Tuesday, doesn't work well for some people. So we will work with your municipal meeting dates and come up with the next meeting date.
Yes, we have committee of the wholes on Tuesdays here.
Okay. So we'll find something that's suitable for all.
Okay, thank you. And so the last item is a motion to adjourn. Make that motion. Councillor Leary, seconded by Warden McQueen. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you, everyone.